Hi, I want to talk about cy.task. I ran into it in the testing workshop Cypress, lesson 18. Now that repository is a bit old and not maintained. So what I did was take all the working parts from Club's repository, Cypress Basics workshop, put all those working parts here, update package.json as we should, and everything until lesson 14 has been working. I just made lesson 18 work. I still have to look at component testing because those instructions, the way of doing component testing from 2 years ago is outdated now. So that's going to come up. So cy.task is tricky because there are multiple mechanics around it that are different than your usual Cypress. Now, a simple task, what's it used for cy.task? At a high level, you can run any node code within Cypress context. So this could be some functions that you write. This could be some npm packages that you're importing. Anything, even async await, can happen. Now, here is a simple task. Now, the first thing, where do you put these tasks? There is a default on task hook, and you can put new task in there. So here we have this task called hello world. The on task hook takes an object. So all these functions, all these objects, all these are properties, right? And it's simply that this object is returning a function. And that function just returns hello, whatever argument you pass in. So the first argument of cy.task is the name of that function or that property. I like to call it function because this is the function. And the argument that you're passing in. So here, the value of the argument world or parameter word would be the argument name. So as you see, that works, should equal hello world. So that's a simple case. Second case is something I run into often, and it's somewhat glanced upon in the documentation, but I just want a working example. So if you have multiple arguments, if you want to pass multiple arguments to such a function, you have to use destruction. So that's the only thing. Because cy.task as the second argument takes any, well, as actually an object or a string. And the keys in that property which you pass in has to mirror the name of the arguments, right? For instance, if this argument name was something else, and if I was running only that test, it would fail because names, the name of the arguments have to match, right? So it thinks it's undefined. So that has to be matching. So destructured and match names. That's what you have to keep in mind. While we're here, let's say you edit the plugin file, save, and then it doesn't have auto restart, right? Like because it's not a spec file, right? So you have to be careful. Anytime you edit the plugin file, I think the best bet is to just stop Cypress and then run it again because the plugin file runs before the runner runs. Okay, so in this case it's fine, but general best practices, major changes. If you make any major changes in the plugin file, restart Cypress. Right, so now we have that matching. Let's go to the third mechanic about Cypress task. So if you run a task from a different task blocks, I didn't know this until today, but apparently you can have multiple task blocks, and it's just the same. So these functions that are here might have been here, same thing. It makes no difference. So on block can be called multiple times. All right, and the other mechanic that we have, this file gets very cluttery. So you can actually require files. You just have to use CommonJS syntax. So let's say we have this file. Let's get the first version. Version 3, version 2, version 1. So this file is just exports a function. And we can import that from a separate file and effectively just use it the same way. We can pass it to the task and call task from other files this way. So that's the separate task file situation. Separate task file, same thing. Hello world. As you see here, it could be asynchronous functions, it could be things from npm packages, anything, any node code. But watch out, there's no retry ability that's built in. So if you want that, you would have to use some other libraries, and those are covered in lesson 18. Or you will implement your own logic. So Cypress retry doesn't apply to cy.task. That's why it's very useful for things to do with recursion. And then the final and my favorite is, let's say this plugin file is getting really unwieldy. What if you wanted to have multiple external files like these ones? In one file, you have certain things that you're doing, the other, another one. So let's call them task file 2 and 3, and then the function is named similarly. The only thing you have to do is you just require them as usual, like you would require another file. And you just create a new object called combine task. And the parts of that object are whatever file you're requiring. So this final object can be just passed on to the task the same way. So usually what I would have is, let's say these aren't here. I would have everything in separate files, keep it super clean, and here just combine all the tasks and import it that way. Otherwise, it can be hard to reason about. Okay, so that topic goes tangent to what do I do with if I have multiple config files? And that also gets confusing for people, but the idea is the same, right? If you have multiple config files and multiple plugins like in this workshop, again, all you do is create a empty a variable to hold, to start with, hold an empty object, and then you just keep adding on to that. So here the Cypress Snapshot plugin, which is kind of complex to set up, but this is how you set it up. The original config object, and any more, like this is another one, but I think it's kind of outdated for component testing. So any plugin can be combined this way, and then at the end you return it at the end of the model exports. Here, I don't think it has to be a promise. I don't know why they have it like this here, but I don't think it does. Okay, if I stop this, start it again, should be okay. Maybe there's a good reason, but I don't know why. Okay, so that's the gist of, as you see, it's running a synchronous task in the last one, two of them, right? So the gist of it, summary, cy.task, you can keep adding tasks into the main task block. If you have a task with multiple arguments, use the structuring, and when you're calling that with cy.task, use an object for multiple arguments. The properties will have to match the argument names. Right? Name, last name, those are matching. Default is the task name, let's say hello world, and then the argument, the value of the argument that you're passing. Task can be there can be multiple task blocks like this one, separate from task block. It can be from external files like this one. You just require it. You have to use common.js syntax. I think I haven't dealt with the TypeScript version of index file because I don't think there's any reason to. And then finally, you can require multiple files, combine them to a single object, and instead of all this noise, just have one task that does the job for you. Okay. That combining objects idea also applies to configurations. So let's say you have multiple configurations, so many plugins, you don't know what to do. Same thing, empty object, pass in the configurations, and at the end, return that config. That is everything. Thank you for listening.